Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Learn to Sew with Nani and I'm your friend Nani. Guys, if you're new to this channel, please subscribe, like and share this video, and please turn on your notification bell so you get notified each time there's a new video. Today I bring us another exciting tutorial on how to make a jumpsuit, and it's not just a jumpsuit, it's going to be a kimono jumpsuit with a shirt detail and a shirt collar. So it's going to have the shirt button, the shirt collar, and it's going to be a kimono sleeve, then a palazzo jumpsuit. So guys, sit back and relax. It's going to be a power-packed tutorial today. All right, so you're learning different things: the palazzo trousers, the palazzo jumpsuit, the shirt placket, the shirt collar. All right, now so to determine the amount of fabric to put on fold, that's going to be determined by your shoulder measurement and your sleeve length. So that's to determine how much fabric you fold into two. All right, so my shoulder is 16 divided by 2 gives us 8 inches. So I'll be adding 8 inches as my sleeve length. I want to use a sleeve length of 8 inches. So 8 plus 8 is 16. Then I'll be having an extra half inch for seam allowance. All right, now for the button placket, that's the button allowance, you're going to be adding 2.5 inches for your button allowance. So 16 and a half plus 2.5 should give us around 19 inches. So I'll be folding 19 inches. Although on fold I have more than 19 inches, and I might just make use of the rest of what I have there, just so that I don't waste the fabric. All right, so you can see on my fabric I've marked 2.5 inches. Then from my starting point to the half length is 20 inches from my half length. Then from the 2.5 inches for the button placket, I'm marking my shoulder, half of my shoulder plus my sleeve length. I'll just use the rest of the fabric. All right, so I'll just cut through the half length because I need to fold in my button placket. All right, so I cut through the half length because I need to fold in my bottom placket, like I said, so it doesn't get in the way of our measurement, or you forget that you're supposed to have a bottom placket and ignore that. Okay, so if you have your pressing iron, you need to press that down just so that it stays intact. So I'll cut through the rest of the fabric just so that I would have my working pattern. All right, so now that we are ready to work, okay, so you make sure if your fabric is moving around like mine, you can get a weight, something to place on it so it doesn't really move around. Okay, now I have to apologize in advance. My chalk is not so visible on this fabric because the fabric is somehow. All right, so from center front I'll mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches. I'm trying to see if I can get a pen to use on it. Then plus my sleeve length of 8 inches. That is what I want. 8 inches as my sleeve length. Then half inch for seam allowance. Okay, so after marking that, I think I have about half inch remaining, and I'll just use up the whole fabric, or I might still trim it out depending if I want to fold in the hem of my sleeve or I want to use a turn up. Now for the neck width, I'm using 2.5, and the neck depth is also 2.5 inches. All right, 2.5 inches width and 2.5 inches depth, because I am working directly on my fabric. If it were to be on a pattern, it's going to be 3 by 3. Then I'll add my half inch allowance round the pattern. Okay, all right, so having done that, the next thing to do is to find out where I would place my bust measurement, and that is determined after taking your shoulder slope, your round sleeve measurement, and the seam allowance. So that is where you determine where to place your bust measurement. Now because this is a kimono, I'll be making the shoulder slope to be 2 inches, and it's going to start at the outer side of the dress. Okay, at the open side of the dress. of the shirt, sorry. So I'm coming down by 2 inches, and I'll be connecting that to my neck width. So this takes care of my shoulder slope. Okay, remember the shoulder slope is 2 inches. Now from that 2 inch mark, I'm going to take my round sleeve measurement. The round sleeve is 14 divided by 2 gives us 7 inches, plus 1 inch for ease because it's a kimono, and 1 inch seam allowance. Okay, so at that point, that would be where I would impute my bust measurement. Okay, sorry, my chalk is not visible at all. The fabric, the prints on the right side is so visible on the wrong side that the chalk is not so visible on it, so just bear with me. Now on that line, I'll take my bust measurement divided by 4. The bust is 44 divided by 4 gives us 11, plus 1 inch is 1 inch seam allowance. I'll talk about ease later. Then on the half length, I'll be marking quarter of my waist, which is 42 divided by 4, and that gave me 10.5, plus 1 inch seam allowance. Okay, now this is not going to have a dot, so we talk about ease. Now on the pattern, on the sample I'm showing on the screen, you can see that there is an excess around the waist, like it was pleated around the trouser part. Okay, just to give it fullness around the waist. So I'll be adding 2.5 inches to 3 inches around that part. So I'll just do 2.5 inches just so that it is not too much. I don't want it to be too much. So I'll do the same thing on the bust line and connect it to the half length. Okay, so remember on the half length, I added 1 inch seam allowance, 1 inch is allowance, then 2.5 inches for that excess freeness, and that is why I'm having this slant line from the waist, from the bust to the waist. All right, so on this part, I'm just going to curve from that sleeve length to the down part of the fabric. You can just measure 1 inch diagonally to get that curve. All right, you can just measure 1 inch diagonally to get the curve. Now for the side, I also come in by 1 inch, then connect it down to my shoulder slope just to slant the sleeve. Okay, so that it's not just straight and pointy and tacky. All right, so you just want to have a curve around the slant line around the, so, and that takes care of the kimono jacket, the kimono shirt. All right, so I'm just going to cut out through it. All right, so remember my half length is 20 inches. All right, so I'll cut through the neckline up to my shoulder line. Okay, so I would cut through to the, from the waistline to the bust. Right, so it's on a slanted line just because I have an excess around that place, then to the curve I made around there, but you want this curve to be defined. Okay, so I'm going to redo that. Remember I said you can do 1 inch diagonally from that bust line, just mark 1 inch diagonally, okay, to have a very smooth curve. So I'm going to redo that curve right now just so that I have a smooth curve and make sure I have up to 1 inch. All right, and that is it. Yeah, it's better like this. Now I'm supposed to cut out the 1 inch for the slant I made there, but I'm going to leave that depending on if I want to add a turn up to my dress. As you can see on the sample, there's a turn up, and if I get a matching fabric for the turn up, I would add a turn up and I'll slant that part. But if I don't get a matching fabric, I'll just hem the lower part. Now I'm taking out 1/2 inch from the upper part of my top, and this is because this is a shirt. So for a shirt, the back is always longer than the front. Now I am supposed to take out 1 inch, but because this is a fabric, I'm marking directly on the fabric, I'll just take out 1/2 inch, then leave the remaining 1/2 inch for my shoulder seam allowance. Okay, remember I'm supposed to take out 1 inch because the back is always shorter by 1 inch and the back is longer. So if I take out 1 inch, I'll be short of allowance to join it. So I'm taking out 1/2 inch. Then to the back pattern, I'll replace the 1 inch, then add an extra 1/2 inch for joining the sleeve. okay, for joining the shoulder. Please, I hope you understand that. I removed half inch from the front part because the front is supposed to be shorter than the back. Ideally, it's supposed to be 1 inch, but because you need shoulder allowance of half inch, that was why I took out just half inch. Then to the back, remember, as you can see, I folded the back fabric and I'm just adding 1.5 inches to the top. You can see 1.5 inches, all right, all the way round it. 1.5 inches, that is what I'm adding. All right, so the 1 inch that we took out from the front and the half inch for allowance. Okay, so normally, now ideally what we took out from the front is 1 inch. If you are drafting directly on a pattern, you can take out 1 inch, then add your seam allowance of half inch around the pattern. But this is your fabric, okay, so you don't need to start wasting pattern paper. Now for the neckline for the back, you maintain the same neck width of 2.5 inches, but the depth you can come down by 1 inch. Okay, so the neck width for the back is 2.5 inches by 1 inch. Okay, but if you're not sure if this would give you an accurate neckline, okay, so we're going to be using the method I used in the senator video. Okay, so if you're measuring or thinking, would 1 inch be too small, would 1 inch be too big for my back neckline, you'll be using the method I use in the senator video. It's on the channel, how to cut a female senator wear. But for those of us who haven't seen that video, I'm going to just explain to us in a minute how to get your back neckline, assuming you're not comfortable, you're not sure if 1 inch or half inch would give you what you desire at your neckline. Now I'm just cutting through the sides of the fabric, making sure everything is properly aligned. Remember, I also folded in the bottom placket because the back is not going to have a bottom placket, so I folded it in and placed it on the back. Now I'm cutting through to this 1.5 inches mark I made here. I want to be sure I have 1.5 inches, just so that one part is no longer or shorter than the other. So 1.5 inches it is. So I'm cutting through that 1.5 inches line, as you can see. Now, so for a shirt, the back is supposed to overlap on the front like this. Okay, so that is how it's going to be. The back would overlap on the front like this. Okay, so now because I'll be using half inch to join, I'll just overlap it by half inch, then trim from the neck width to the fold on the neckline. Okay, just from that fold. All right, so just fold it, make sure it's overlapping by half inch. It's overlapping the lower part by half inch, then you cut through the fold only on the up part, just round like that, only on the up part. You're not cutting the hole, to just cut that fold, the fold you just made. Okay, only that fold. So I'm just cutting it through like that. I opened it just so that we can see. So by the time I cut out, it's just 1 inch I cut out at the end of the day. So if you're not sure whether to use 1 inch or half inch or 1.5, just fold it and then cut out the fold. That's all. Just place it like this, then make sure you use the same neck width, and it's so easy. All right, so now we are done with cutting the front and the back. All right, so I want to show us how to sew your button placket. So you make sure that you bring your front and it's properly aligned. Make sure that all the sides align, your neckline and every other part is matching. So just like we open up our zip allowance, we also open up the button allowance on the center front. So we just open up the button allowance, making sure to steady your fabric. My fabric is moving around so much, so I'm making sure my hand is on it just so that I help stabilize the fabric. All right, so cutting through the button allowance. Now remember, the button allowance we added was 2.5 inches, so I'm just going to show us how to sew that. So you go to your machine and you do exactly what I'm going to be showing you next. All right, so the button allowance is 2.5 inches, so you fold in half inch, then fold in 1 inch like that. Okay, fold in ½ inch, then fold the remaining to meet the blue line, that's that 2.5 inch line. Okay, I'll say it again, fold in 1/2 inch, then 1 inch. All right, so you also do the same thing on the lower part. You can use your pin to hold it down, then go to your sewing machine and sew, so that when you flip it to the right side, this is what you would have. Okay, so I'll go to my machine and I'll do that. Then on the other side, you also do the same thing, fold in ½ inch, then 1 inch. Okay, then you go and run a straight stitch on it, so that when you place it on the front, it's going to overlap. Okay guys, now we want to talk about the trouser part of this jumpsuit. Okay, so for this trouser part, you need a few measurements. So I folded my fabric on fold, and this is the waistline, the hip line, and the crotch depth. Okay, so I've used the marker to highlight these lines. That's the knee line. The next line is the floor length. That's to the floor, because it's a palazzo. You have to get it to the floor length. Then 2 inches seam allowance for folding the hem. Now for this trouser, you need your waist circumference, your hip circumference, your thigh circumference, the knee length, and the knee length. Now to determine your crotch, you divide your hip measurement by 4. So my hip is 44, divided by 4 gives me 11. Now this trouser has a band, so I'm just going to leave the crotch at 11, then maybe add an extra 2 inches band. Now on the waistline, I come in by 1 inch. On the knee line, I go in by 2 inches, and on the trouser length, I go in by 3 inches. Normal procedure for trouser. All right, so remember, hip divided by 4 gives you the crotch. They will be adding 2 inches band to it. All right, so I'm going to connect the 1 inch on the waist to the hip. Okay, connect the 1 inch on the waist to the hip. I'm trying to use my chalk to make that line more visible. Then the next thing you do would be to connect from the crotch to the 2 inches we came in at the knee line. All right, so you just extend that line there. Then from the knee line, you also connect the 2 inches to the 3 inches we made on the hem of the trouser. And that gives us the shape of our trouser. You know, it has already given us that sweet trouser shape. Now you have to start taking in your measurements. So on the waistline, remember my half length was 20 inches, so I'm making sure that all my lines are in order. So the hip depth is 8 inches, while the crotch is 11. All right, so make sure to take whatever one that's your accurate measurement. My knee line is 43, and the trouser length is, the jumpsuit length is 60 inches, then plus extra 2 inches. All right, so you want to make sure that when you're taking the measurement for this trouser, you start from wherever you stopped at your half length. Now on the waistline, I'll take in my waist measurement divided by 4 plus 2 inches seam allowance. All right, waist divided by 4 plus 2 inches seam allowance. Then on the hip line, you impute your hip divided by 4 plus 2 inches seam allowance. So the hip is 44, divided by 4 gives us 11 plus 2 inches. So I'll try to use a marker to highlight those points. You know, my fabric is really somehow. All right, so on the crotch depth, you take in your thigh circumference divided by 2 plus 1 inch, just 1 inch. Okay, you don't want the trouser to be bulging around the crotch. You don't want to have excess allowance around that place. We are females, so you don't need to have a package down there. It's as if your trouser is packing below, so just add 1 inch. So I'll connect it with the curve to the hip. Okay, you can see that curve. The chalk and the marker, they're just dealing with me today, but it's all right, we'll conquer. All right, so from the waist to the hip, you also connect those points. Now we are almost done with this trouser part. Like guys, it's super easy that you can always make like 10 jumpsuits in a day. You can actually cut like 10. Okay. All right. So having done that, the next thing to do is to determine how wide you want the palazzo to be. Now, if you want a very wide-legged palazzo, a slightly fitted palazzo, it depends on you. But for me, I'll be working with 12 inches as the wideness of my palazzo. Now, if this were to be a fitted trouser or a pencil trouser, you need to take in your knee measurement. But in this case, we're doing a palazzo, so I'll just take in 12 inches. That is what I'll be using, and probably add an extra 1 inch, or I could leave it just 12 inches is okay. All right, so I'll connect from the crotch down to the 12 inches mark I made on the trouser length. Now note, if you want it wider, you can actually do the 12 inches and add 1 inch for seam, but I really want it, I don't want it to be too big. I'm already on the big side, so anything that makes me look bigger, I don't do it. All right, so that'll be it. So at the top of the trouser, I'll be adding ½ inch seam allowance to join to the band, then the band to the bodice. All right, now remember, if you're not attaching the band, you make, after dividing your hip by 4, you're going to be adding an extra 2 inches to that, so that you have a perfect jumpsuit, so that you can be able to move around, take a bike and all of that. So because I'm adding the band of 2 inches, is replacing that 2 inches I should have added. I hope you got that. All right, so I'm cutting through to the lower part of the jumpsuit. Remember, we left 2 inches folding or hemming allowance. Then I'm cutting through to the wideness of the trouser, up or upwards to the knee, and going up to the crotch. All right, so you want to make sure you do the crotch in a gentle curve, like so. And that is it. Okay, so for your jumpsuit, you can decide to add your pockets by the side, or do your inseam pockets. Now I'll be cutting through the 3 inches line we made on the hemline to the 2 inches mark we did on the hip line, to the crotch, and then to the 1 inch line we made on the waistline, and that gives us the front part of our trouser pattern. All right, so you will just make sure you cut through that part. All right, that is super easy and so beautiful. So also cut through the ½ inch seam allowance we left for joining to the band. All right, so now doing this gives you a perfect high waist trouser. Your hip divided by 4 just gives you a high waist trouser. All right, if you are doing a trouser that will sit just on your waistline, you do your hip divided by 4 minus 1 inch. All right, so for the back, I've placed the front pattern on it, and I turned it upside down so that my material or my fabric would be enough for that. I am working with just 3 yards of fabric for this outfit. All right, so I've placed the fabric, and you make sure that along the crotch line you have an excess of at least 2 to 2.5 inches, depending on how big or small you are. If you're on the small size, you could do 1.5. On the big side, you could do 2 inches, and if you're like very big, you could do 2.5 to 3 inches. All right, so on the side, you just want to make sure you have exactly the same thing on your trouser. And if you want to add a that to the back pattern, you can do that. But now on the crotch line, I'm having an extension of 2 inches, maybe 2.5. That's what I have on the fabric. That's what I have remaining on the fabric. All right, so I'm still adjusting to make sure that everything is properly aligned, and this is very important so that you don't have a shortage or an excess. All right, so I'm adding 2 inches, and this is for the bum allowance. All right, for the back of your jumpsuit, you need to have that extra inches for the bum allowance so that you can be able to move around or sit on this jumpsuit while wearing this jumpsuit. If you make the front and the back equal, once you raise your leg to take a bike, your trouser would tear, and we don't want to have that embarrassment. Then on the hem of the trouser, we mark 1 inch, just 1 inch, seam allowance to just join all the parts together. So from the 2.5 inches or whatever I decided to do there, you connect to the 1 inch on the hemline. All right, so I'm using a marker to connect that point. Sorry, it is not so visible, but please imagine that you're seeing a line around there. still trying to find a chalk, a pen, something that I can use to do that. All right, so I think I got a chalk and it's still not visible, but guys, let's just go ahead with this video. All right, so remember 2.5 inches, that is what I used. You could do 1.5, you could do 2 inches. Maximum you would do is 3 inches. Please guys, don't just say 3 inches. All right, so now what I'll do next would be to connect that 2.5 inches mark we made directly to my waistline. Now, if I was to add a zipper to this jumpsuit, remember our jumpsuit already has a shirt detail. That means the front is open. So if I were to have my zipper at the back, it means on the waistline I'll be adding 1 inch for zip allowance, just so that I can use that 1 inch for my zip allowance. But now there's no zip at the back, so I'll connect the 2 inches or 2.5 inches mark I made on the crotch directly to where I have my waistline, guys. I'm sorry you can't see this clearly, but that is what I did. All right, directly to the tip, as in that part where my waistline on the front ended. That's exactly where I am doing this. No extra allowance. Remember, if you're making a jumpsuit that has a zipper at the back, you add 1 inch for the zip allowance, and that's pretty much it for the back. So I'm just cutting through to the waistline. Then on this other side, you just have exactly the same thing. Just trace the pattern on the front and use that pattern to cut the back. So around that part, you just have exactly the same thing. But if you want a dart for this, you'd leave 1 inch dart allowance at the top or at the waistline of the back jumpsuit. Most times I usually just add darts to the back of my jumpsuit and not to the front. So but in this case, this is actually a little bit of free outfit for me, so I wouldn't be doing a dart for it. All right, so I'm cutting through to the crotch, and you can see what I have on my waistline is exactly what I'm having at the back, but the front is extending by 2.5 inches, then the hem by 1 inch. So I'm cutting through to that. All right, then cut out the excess at the lower part, guys. We are done. Like, this fashion thing is actually easy when you get, the tips and the tricks, when you get all those hidden info you get. So it's actually quite entertaining, fun. All right, so this is the back of my jumpsuit. I've taken out the front pattern and you can see it. So this is it. I would go and join on my sewing machine, and I would come back and show us. So this is the cutting part of this video. Please watch out for the next video on how to sew your jumpsuit. Then till I come your way next time, I'm still your friend Nani. Alright, so this is what I have from 3 yards of material. Thanks for watching, guys. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Bye bye. Be safe.